It happened without warning. A royal update, issued quietly on the official website, sent shockwaves through the monarchy. Princess Catherine had just been elevated to a position no one outside the firm expected, and yet, it wasn't just the promotion that caught the world's attention. It was what that promotion meant for Queen Camilla. Behind the scenes, power had shifted, and the Queen Consort's influence was suddenly in free fall. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The clock had barely struck midnight when the statement was released, a seemingly routine administrative notice that was anything but ordinary. It announced that Princess Catherine would assume the newly expanded title of Senior Royal Council Liaison, a role unheard of by the public until that moment. But make no mistake, this was not a ceremonial gesture. It came with power, real strategic oversight over ceremonial planning, public-facing engagements, and internal operations, once quietly controlled by Queen Camilla's circle. Overnight, the balance of influence inside the palace had changed, and what was more shocking than the title itself was that Camilla had not been informed until the public had. Royal sources confirmed what many had feared behind the palace walls. This move was not born out of tradition. It was a calculated shift, endorsed by senior aides, and according to whispers, granted silent approval by the king himself. Catherine, once viewed as the gentle peacemaker within the royal machine, had now stepped into the heart of royal operations, and she hadn't asked for permission. Within hours, the ripple effects hit every corner of the monarchy's ecosystem. Tabloids scrambled to reframe the narrative. Was this a strategic handover of future responsibilities, or a quiet exile of Queen Camilla's influence? Social media erupted, celebrating the news with unfiltered enthusiasm. Finally, one post read, "A royal who reflects the people's voice is holding real power." Inside the aristocracy, however, the reaction was different, measured, wary, even fearful. Allies of Camilla began reaching out privately, trying to decipher the unspoken message. They found none, because the message was clear enough. Catherine's rise was no longer symbolic. It was structural. For Catherine, this was not the beginning of a reign, but the solidifying of her role as the monarchy's quiet architect. The Princess of Wales, once seen simply as the future Queen Consort, had now become the strategic anchor in a palace divided by legacy and ego. And for Camilla, the fallout had only just begun. Rumours of her exclusion from the final decision were confirmed by insiders who described her reaction as deeply unsettled and personally wounded. Yet no formal statement was released. Not from her, not from Charles. And that silence was louder than any denial. But this wasn't just a new title, this was the culmination of months of internal chaos, and it began long before the world knew anything at all. Long before the announcement, whispers echoed through Buckingham's corridors. Catherine and Camilla, once portrayed as allies, had drifted into silence. Behind the velvet curtains, a battle for influence was underway. It wasn't loud, it wasn't public, but it was strategic, and it was ruthless. In the immediate aftermath of Queen Elizabeth's passing, the monarchy found itself in transition, not just in title, but in tone. For Camilla, it marked the culmination of a decades-long climb. She moved swiftly, embedding herself deeper into King Charles's core advisory team, aligning with the traditionalists, and ensuring her presence was cemented at the center of every decision. It was, for a time, unchallenged. But in the background, a quieter shift was taking place. Catherine, now Princess of Wales, began commanding not just attention but loyalty. Her engagements drew crowds not out of duty, but genuine admiration. Where Camilla symbolized continuity, Catherine radiated renewal. And that subtle contrast began to divide not just the public but the palace itself. The tension between them didn't erupt in public. It never would. But behind every photo op, there was a pause. Behind every handshake, a carefully measured silence. Staff noticed. Courtiers whispered. Royal watchers pointed out missing glances and changed seating arrangements. Camilla, once confident in her growing sway, grew increasingly wary of Catherine's effortless magnetism. And Catherine, though outwardly composed, was no longer willing to yield. The age of deferential hierarchy was ending, and she knew it. The first signs of rupture emerged in the details. Camilla's influence shaped certain patronage decisions, redirecting attention toward causes aligned with her private circle. Meanwhile, Catherine quietly expanded her work with early childhood, mental health, and modernized educational programs, drawing praise not just from the press, but from politicians, world leaders, and international media. Inside the palace, staff began to divide. Some viewed Camilla's approach as traditional and necessary, but others, especially younger aides, found Catherine's vision not just modern, but essential for survival in a changing world. Meetings grew tenser, plans were reworked, timelines delayed, and still, no one dared name the power shift openly. That silence was broken by the subtlest of betrayals. Leaks measured, discreet began making their way into the media. Reports of growing distance between the Queen Consort and the Princess of Wales. Analysts speculating on the lack of shared engagements. Headlines questioning why two of the most high-profile women in the monarchy were no longer seen together. The leaks didn't come from the press office. They came from within. Royal aides, caught between loyalty and legacy, began choosing sides. The palace didn't deny the rumors. It couldn't. And yet, for all the speculation, nothing had been confirmed. No dramatic showdown, no public fallout, just a quiet game of royal chess. But beneath it all, a storm was building. The question was never if something would break, it was when. The palace had become a pressure cooker of subtle gestures, coded speeches, and strategic absences, and all it took was one moment, one royal engagement to tip the entire balance. As the divide deepened, one royal engagement tipped the balance, and Catherine used the moment to rewrite her place in the royal order. It was meant to be ceremonial, forgettable, but by the end of the day, it was all anyone could talk about. During a high-profile royal visit, something unexpected happened. Catherine was given a gesture meant for Camilla, and the cameras captured every second of it. The day began like any other royal engagement, tight scheduling, polished appearances, and a lineup of carefully choreographed greetings. The event, a military commemoration, was supposed to place Queen Camilla at its center. She had been the intended recipient of the symbolic salute, a gesture of honor typically reserved for the highest-ranking woman in attendance. But when the convoy arrived, something shifted. Catherine, stepping out ahead of Camilla due to a small logistical mix-up, was greeted first. A senior officer, unaware of the internal palace protocol, saluted her directly, presenting the ceremonial emblem in her hands. The moment was brief, but explosive. A camera flash here, a nod there. But in that split second, a message had been sent, and the entire country would be talking about it by nightfall. What made the moment so significant wasn't just the salute. It was the reaction. Camilla, walking just steps behind, hesitated. Her expression, usually composed, stiffened. The brief chill between the women was caught on camera, magnified by the slow-motion lenses of the media. The clip went viral within hours. Commentators rushed to decode the symbolism. Royal insiders scrambled to reframe the narrative, but the damage had been done. The press dubbed it the accidental coronation, a phrase that stuck. To the public, it was more than a blunder, it was a sign. Social media exploded with side-by-side comparisons. Catherine's graceful acceptance of the salute was framed against Camilla's visible discomfort. Thousands of posts poured in, praising the Princess of Wales for her dignity, for her calm, for her quiet power. The event trended for days, not because of what was planned, but because of what happened unplanned. And somewhere within the palace walls, the firm was watching, closely. King Charles, caught in the middle of a moment he hadn't orchestrated, attempted to neutralize the growing media storm. He gave no interviews, made no gestures of preference, but those in the room noticed something. A nod from the king during Catherine's remarks, a softened gaze, a silent approval that spoke louder than words. No direct endorsement came, but no correction did either. In the aftermath, something shifted behind the scenes. Senior courtiers, long aligned with Camilla's traditionalist stance, began whispering of a new tone, a new vision, one shaped not by the past but by the future. And in every whispered conversation, one name echoed again and again: Catherine. That moment became the catalyst, but it was what Catherine did next that solidified her position as more than just a figurehead. Few expected it, even fewer approved, but Catherine wasn't waiting anymore. In a private proposal submitted directly to senior courtiers, she outlined a radical vision, one that would modernize royal operations and subtly remove outdated influence. It was bold. It was brilliant, and it made Camilla furious. The document was detailed, meticulously prepared, and delivered with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed approval to lead. Catherine's vision didn't revolve around spectacle or tradition. It was about evolution. She proposed reorienting the monarchy's focus away from hereditary privilege and toward tangible, human-centered causes. At the heart of the plan was a powerful expansion of the royal family's engagement with mental health, digital education, and youth-driven charities. These weren't the ceremonial causes of yesteryear. They were urgent, relevant, and deeply rooted in the struggles of everyday citizens. Catherine wasn't just proposing a shift in visibility, she was proposing a shift in purpose. But it didn't stop there. Her proposal included a strategic reduction in appearances at aristocratic galas and elite society events that had long defined Camilla's calendar. Instead, Catherine suggested a bold pivot. Regional community visits, school mentorship tours, and grassroots partnerships that would reframe the monarchy as an institution led by empathy, not entitlement. Her phrasing was careful, diplomatic, but the implications were unmistakable. Camilla's role, long defined by maintaining the old guard, was suddenly at odds with the image the monarchy needed to survive. The reaction behind the scenes was immediate and divided. Senior aides who had long tolerated the palace's inertia saw an opportunity. They praised the clarity, the relevance, the potential to secure public trust in an era of dwindling royal reverence. Princess Anne, seasoned and respected, was the first to lend her quiet support. Prince Edward followed, acknowledging that the future of the crown depended not on tradition alone, but on transformation. King Charles, presented with the proposal in a private meeting, was intrigued. He asked questions, weighed the optics. But notably, he did not involve Camilla until the document was already circulating internally. That decision lit the fuse. Camilla, blindsided and humiliated, viewed the proposal as nothing short of an ambush. Her allies pushed back, arguing that Catherine's ideas undermined the dignity of the crown. But it was too late. The palace had already begun shifting resources, reassigning staff, and reworking the next year's royal calendar based on Catherine's recommendations. The winds had changed. And while the Queen Consort still held her title, it was Catherine whose hand was now shaping the monarchy's future. Camilla's fury, according to palace sources, was volcanic. But no one could ignore the truth. Catherine's plan was working. The public loved it. The institution needed it. And the throne, whether it admitted it or not, was beginning to orbit around her. But as the plan gained momentum, one leaked conversation brought the private rivalry crashing into public view. It was supposed to stay private. But in the royal world, nothing ever does. A leaked audio clip of Camilla, allegedly venting about Catherine's growing control, landed in the hands of a tabloid editor. What followed was a media explosion and a devastating blow to Camilla's dignity. The recording surfaced without warning, passed quietly from one insider to another, before landing in the hands of someone who knew exactly what it was worth. The voice, unmistakable in tone and cadence, was said to belong to Camilla, frustrated, unfiltered, and furious. In the clip, she allegedly complained that Catherine was undoing everything I've built, accusing her of rewriting royal priorities and stripping influence from those who had fought for decades to shape the monarchy's direction. It wasn't polished. It wasn't diplomatic. And that was precisely why it was explosive. For years, Camilla had worked carefully to control her public image. In less than 3 minutes of leaked audio, that image began to crumble. Traditional royal media outlets hesitated. Editors debated. Legal teams were consulted. No one wanted to be responsible for igniting a constitutional firestorm, but while newspapers stalled, the internet didn't. Online platforms exploded as fragments of the audio circulated in hushed captions and anonymous uploads. The public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Many heard bitterness where they once saw resilience. Others accused Camilla of entitlement, of clinging to power while the monarchy struggled to modernize. The backlash was immediate. Comment sections filled with anger. Support for Catherine surged even higher, not because she spoke, but because she didn't. Her silence became its own statement. Inside the palace, the fallout was brutal. King Charles was reportedly blindsided by the leak. Insiders described him as distressed, pacing, replaying the implications over and over. Not just for Camilla, but for the institution itself. The monarchy was being pulled into open conflict, and the illusion of unity was slipping fast. Emergency meetings were called. Advisors scrambled to contain the damage. Within hours, the palace issued a vague statement, dismissing reports of fabricated tensions and misrepresented recordings. But no denial followed, no clarification, and that silence spoke volumes. Camilla's inner circle rushed into damage control mode. Allies attempted to cast doubt on the recording's authenticity. Others quietly distanced themselves. Staffers began requesting transfers. The sense of control Camilla once commanded was eroding in real time. Meanwhile, Catherine remained completely silent. No comment, no rebuttal, no carefully crafted message. And somehow, that restraint elevated her even further. Public opinion hardened around her not as a rival, but as the embodiment of calm amid chaos. She didn't need to speak. The moment was speaking for her, and while Camilla's circle scrambled for damage control, the crown made its most decisive move yet. He didn't make a speech. He didn't call a press conference. But behind the scenes, King Charles made his feelings known. With one signature, he allowed the shift to proceed. The balance had tipped, and Camilla was left with no recourse. In the quiet chambers of court politics, power doesn't change hands with grand proclamations, it happens through ink and silence. The decision came quietly, slipped through a chain of confidential memos and discreet nods. King Charles signed off on Catherine's promotion not in a blaze of ceremony, but in the privacy of his private office. The position, still freshly minted, was now more than symbolic. With royal approval, Catherine was granted expanded authority to co-chair multiple high-level committees, many of which had previously been within Camilla's influence. From public outreach planning to ceremonial scheduling and charity patronage oversight, Catherine's voice now carried institutional weight. Advisors, long frustrated with the fractured dynamics at the top, pushed quickly to capitalize on the momentum. They proposed what they called a public visibility restructuring plan, a strategic redistribution of official engagements that would elevate Catherine's role further while quietly reducing Camilla's day-to-day spotlight. The changes were not announced publicly, but insiders noticed them immediately. High-profile events that once centered around the Queen Consort were reassigned. Catherine's name appeared on itineraries more frequently, her public presence growing even as she maintained her signature poise. Charles, it seemed, was trying to walk a tightrope. He didn't confront Camilla. He didn't rescind the decision. He simply allowed the new order to unfold. But those closest to him could see the cost. The emotional toll was beginning to show. Sources close to the palace described him as withdrawn, torn between loyalty to the woman he fought decades to stand beside and the undeniable reality that Catherine was becoming the unifying force the monarchy needed. His silence wasn't indifference, it was fatigue, a king caught between legacy and necessity. And then came the Whisper's staff, referring to Catherine, not officially, but affectionately, as the crown's true compass. It was subtle, but it echoed through every hallway. The respect was no longer confined to the public. It was institutional. In meeting rooms, in event planning, even in foreign diplomatic briefings, Catherine's input began to carry more weight. Camilla, though still Queen Consort, found herself increasingly edged out of key conversations. This was no longer just a change in role. It was a redefinition of relevance. And as the firm reshaped itself in Catherine's image, one truth became impossible to deny. This was her moment. But while titles and influence shifted in her favor, Catherine's next move stunned everyone and revealed what she truly valued above all. She could have claimed the spotlight. She could have rebranded her image with power. Instead, Catherine's first act in her new role was shockingly humble, and it won the hearts of millions overnight. Just days after her quiet ascension into a position of unprecedented influence, all eyes were on the Princess of Wales. But while the press speculated over her next official appearance, and royal watchers debated how she'd handle her new power, Catherine slipped away from the palatial stage and into the margins of the kingdom. No grand speech, no ornate celebration. Instead, a modest press release announced a new initiative, one personally championed by Catherine, focused entirely on displaced women, single mothers, and those often left behind by both society and the system. It was a sharp pivot from royal tradition, and it caught everyone off guard. Instead of elevating herself, Catherine had elevated others. What followed was nothing short of extraordinary. She stepped out of stately halls and into crisis centres. She sat with mothers rebuilding their lives. She listened, not as a figurehead, but as a woman who understood the gravity of dignity, of purpose. Gone were the formalities of high-profile royal engagements. In their place were quiet, meaningful encounters that redefined what modern monarchy could look like. And through it all, Catherine refused to speak of her promotion. Every question about her new role was redirected toward the initiative. She would not play palace politics in public. She chose compassion over optics, substance over symbolism. Social media, often a battlefield of royal comparison and criticism, lit up with praise. Thousands shared stories, tributes, and personal accounts of how Catherine's visits had impacted them. Photos emerged, not from official photographers, but from community workers and volunteers of Catherine with her sleeves rolled up, immersed in the details that never make headlines. "She sees us," one post read. "Not just waves to us." It was raw, emotional, and unfiltered. And it shifted the narrative entirely. This wasn't just a royal fulfilling duty. This was a woman setting an example and challenging the monarchy to evolve with her. Even the firm began to change in tone. Internally, the air shifted from tense rivalry to something more reflective. For the first time in months, meetings among senior royals reportedly felt less theatrical and more grounded. There were still divisions, but Catherine's actions, so deliberate in their humility, began to lower the temperature. She wasn't fighting for power, she was redefining it. And in doing so, she became not just admired, but respected across political and generational divides. It was the kind of leadership that didn't demand attention, but earned it. Yet peace, in the world of crowns and titles, is never permanent. In the shadows of Catherine's rising influence, another force was stirring. Camilla, sidelined and humiliated, was not ready to disappear quietly, and what she did next reopened old wounds. With her influence waning and Catherine now firmly in the public's favour, Camilla made one final move to reclaim control. But instead of restoring her power, it exposed a deeper fracture in the monarchy and turned allies into critics. In what was marketed as an exclusive gala honouring traditional royal values, Camilla orchestrated a lavish event designed to remind the world of her standing within the royal hierarchy. Every detail was tightly managed, every invitation curated with precision. But one glaring omission echoed louder than any fanfare. Catherine was not invited, not by accident, not by oversight. It was intentional, and the message was clear. This was Camilla's line in the sand. A final attempt to draw the spotlight back, to assert dominance over a narrative that had long since slipped through her fingers. But the move misfired almost immediately. Behind the scenes, senior royals were uneasy. Princess Anne reportedly declined the invitation the moment she saw the guest list. Prince Edward followed. Even more damning, several long-serving aides within Camilla's circle began submitting quiet requests for reassignment. The signal was unmistakable. What was once a calculated display of authority was now seen as a tone-deaf act of desperation. The press pounced. Headlines branded the gala defensive, out of touch, and a stunning misread of the nation's mood. Where Catherine had elevated voices from the margins, Camilla's event reeked of exclusivity and exclusion. Commentators didn't hold back. They drew brutal contrasts between the two women, one forging connection, the other grasping for relevance. The visuals of the event, intended to convey elegance, only amplified the narrative of retreat. Opulence had replaced substance, and the absence of unity spoke volumes. What hurt most, however, was not the criticism from the outside, it was the silence from within. King Charles, ever the symbol of continuity, refused to issue a statement in defense of his wife's decision. Privately, sources described him as exhausted, troubled, and torn between loyalty and legacy. He attended the event out of obligation, but left before the final toast. That gesture did not go unnoticed, and within hours, royal observers declared the balance of power decisively shifted. Camilla was still queen, yes, but she was no longer central. The institution, so often slow to evolve, had chosen its compass, and it pointed away from the past. In households across the country, the debate was no longer about titles, it was about tone, about meaning, about who truly embodied the spirit of modern monarchy. And it was Catherine's name that came up again and again. Camilla's last stand hadn't brought the reckoning she'd hoped for. It had instead opened a wider conversation, one that questioned her role, her motives, and her future. The monarchy had split not in structure, but in soul. And yet, in the quiet of that royal storm, Catherine chose not to gloat, because while Camilla's court unravelled, something far more lasting was quietly taking shape elsewhere. But amidst the turmoil, a quiet moment between Catherine and her children revealed the legacy she was building, one that went far beyond power plays. This wasn't about winning. It never had been. While the world fixated on titles, Catherine had been focused on something deeper. And now, as the monarchy reshaped itself in real time, her influence had become more than symbolic. It had become historic. In quiet corners of the kingdom, it began. Not with headlines or applause, but with action. Shelters once overlooked saw renewed funding. Youth centres found themselves with unexpected royal backing. Mental health campaigns no longer felt like polite tokens, but powerful missions driven by conviction. These weren't just palace initiatives, they were Catherine's fingerprints, pressed softly yet unmistakably into the foundation of a changing monarchy. Her vision hadn't been grand declarations. It was subtle, lived, and enduring. Outreach became engagement. Patronage became partnership. Royal appearances became human connection. And the public responded not with fanfare, but with trust. Across the UK, youth-driven programs were no longer an afterthought, they were the centerpiece. Empowering leadership in schools, mental health resources in underserved communities, public forums inviting dialogue rather than dictation. These weren't simply projects with Catherine's name attached. They were reflections of her ideals, rippling outward with every small decision she made. While some still obsessed over royal hierarchy, Catherine had already moved on. She wasn't reshaping the institution by command. She was transforming it by example. And in doing so, she redefined the very heart of royal relevance in the 21st century. And as the tide turned, Camilla quietly stepped back. Officially, it was due to a renewed focus on personal matters. But behind the curtain, insiders knew she had been eclipsed not by confrontation, but by contrast. Catherine hadn't fought to dethrone her. She had simply risen in such a way that the crown itself tilted toward her. Camilla, once the keeper of courtly presence, found herself increasingly absent from key briefings and ceremonial roles. The shift was neither sudden nor cruel. It was inevitable. The institution had chosen evolution over tradition, and the woman leading that shift did so without ever demanding it. The media caught up quickly. Front pages declared the crown's new era, but the narrative was no longer centered on power, it was about purpose. Headlines read not of rivalry, but of realignment. Commentators who once scrutinized Catherine's every step now chronicled the impact of her presence. No longer defined by comparison, she had carved her own path, and the monarchy followed. Behind the scenes, even long-time courtiers admitted it. There was before Catherine, and there was after, and nothing would be the same again. But perhaps the most powerful transformation was the one the world couldn't fully see. Inside the walls of Kensington Palace, amid the roles and responsibilities, Catherine remained constant as a mother. Her influence didn't end at the foot of a throne, it extended into bedtime stories, handwritten notes, and a belief that legacy isn't what you leave behind in titles, but what you build in the hearts of those you love. Her name may now be etched in royal records. Her signature may grace documents that carry the monarchy into a new era. But her true legacy? That lives in the quiet strength she inspired, the compassion she amplified, and the institution she gently, irreversibly changed. And so, in the quiet echoes of a role reshaped, one truth remains. Catherine didn't just change the monarchy, she changed what the monarchy means. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.